Hello, and welcome to the CHRS Recruiting Training for Faculty Searches. This is Unit B2, Updating Applicant Statuses and Related Communications. This training is for anyone who will be approving and or changing applicant statuses during the faculty search process. This will include college analysts, department chairs, and search committee chairs. You should have already attended or reviewed previous units that cover how to log into the system and how the system works in general, as well as how to submit a position requisition and how to review applicants as a member of the search committee. This unit will focus on how to move an applicant from one status to another. On the screen now is the process overview quick guide, which shows all of the statuses that are available in the system. Generally, applicants are moved from one status to another in a sequential model. You'll be referencing the process overview quick guide as well as two training scripts. Training script number 4, which talks about how to change an applicant status, and training script number 6, which talks about the communications involved with those status updates. You can access all training materials on the Dropbox link sent out to you previously. For now, we'll focus on training script number 4. I will go through and highlight the important parts of this training script, and of course, you're welcome to go through this on your own and work in the system. So, to change an applicant status, you first need to access the job that you're working on. So to do that, you would go to your dashboard in CHRS Recruiting, and you would identify the jobs widget and click on the link to your team jobs. That'll bring you to your jobs page or my jobs page, and you'll want to make sure that the search buttons are as shown in the screen, where you have the current jobs as well as your team jobs. This will bring you to a list of jobs that we call the jobs page. These are all the jobs that you are associated with. And you'll want to click on the title of the job that you're trying to move applicants from one status to another for. So I'll go ahead and show you how to do this in the system itself. So here's your dashboard in CHRS Recruiting. Here's the jobs widget, and then we'll click on the team jobs. This brings you to all the jobs that you are associated with, and you would want to click on the one that you're trying to work on as far as applicant statuses are concerned. For now, I'll choose Assistant Professor of Titan Studies, job number 493649. I'll click the View button, and that will bring me to the position requisition. So that brings us to where we left off on the training script. The position requisition is primarily used in other parts of the process. What we're really interested in now is looking at the applicants. So to do that, you'll click the big blue button, View Applications. I'll show you that in the system. You'll click View Applications, and that'll bring you to a list of the applicants for this particular job. The list of applicants shows you many pieces of information for each applicant. So it'll show you the date they submitted, their current status, their applicant number, their first and last name, and some contact information. So looking back at the training script number 4, there are actually multiple ways that you can change the status of an applicant. In particular, you can change the status of one applicant at a time, or you can change the status of many applicants at once. First, I'll show you how to change the status of one applicant. That basically involves clicking the status link for that particular applicant. So in the system, if I wanted to change the status for the first applicant, Melanie Hammond, I would click on the status for that applicant. That would bring up the Change Application Status window, and I would move the applicant from any one status to the next. Typically, we follow these sequentially unless there's a decision to be made, such as whether or not the dean approves or denies the applicant pool. So in this case, I'll move the candidate to the next typical status, which would be DSC applicant successful candidate review. Whenever you disposition an applicant to the next status, it'll bring up this window, which we call the communications window, and it's listed as confirmed status change at the top. This allows for you to see which status you're moving the applicant from and to which status you're moving the applicant. We never use a template, and we have several options for communications, which we'll get to later on in this training. So for now, we'll just move the applicant by clicking the Move Now button at the bottom. And you can see in the list of applicants that the status for the first applicant has now changed to DSC applicant successful. If I wanted to move several applicants at one time, you would utilize these checkboxes over on the left. So let's say I wanted to move the second, third, and fourth candidate to the next status. You would click their checkboxes, and then you would go to this drop-down menu at the top and choose Bulk Move. This allows you to go to the next page where there's a drop-down menu for the various statuses. Again, we'll move them to the next most typical status, which is DSC applicant successful, and click Next. This will bring up the communications window. We'll skip that for now and go ahead and just move them to the next status. The system completes a bulk move, and you can see all three of those candidates were moved into the next status. You'll note that you can click on the status link at the very top, which will reorder the applicants based on the status that they're in. If you wanted to move all applicants at the same time, you could simply click this All button at the top, and that'll select all of the applicants at once. And then you could similarly do a bulk move. We won't do that in this case. So if we go back to the training script, you'll see that we covered this section on how to move one or more applicants at the same time by doing a bulk move using the checkboxes. In this training, we'll also note that there are some statuses that are optional. That particular status is the DSC semifinalist reference check status. The important thing to note here is that if you want to conduct a reference check at the semifinalist stage, then you will have to use this particular status. But in most cases, you would skip this status and the two statuses after it. We'll talk further about reference checks and letters of recommendation in training unit letter D. But that covers the most important aspects of moving an applicant from one status to another. Now we'll move on to training script 6, which talks about that communications window and all of the communications associated with status changes. So here's the training script. One of the first things we want to point out is that the descriptions of users in the CHRS system may be different from the way we describe them here on campus. So for example, in the system, it says reports to supervisor name. In our parlance, that's referring to the department chair. Additionally, when it says hiring administrator or hiring manager, that's referring to the college analyst. So you can reference that table as needed as we move through this training. So when you move an applicant from one status to another, there are primarily two types of communications that occur, either an internal communication or an external communication. So if we go to the system and I disposition an applicant, it'll bring up the communications window. We'll ignore that top part for just a moment and focus instead on this blue bar that says email applicant. This is the trigger that allows for an external communication to happen. If this is set to yes, then it will email the applicant. And anytime that an applicant should be emailed to, we've put in default values for this external communication. So you can see the from address is a no reply address. We've put in a subject line that has the job title and the job number filled in by default by the system, and then an email default language that we crafted in HRDI. For all communications in the system, you are free to edit them as necessary. So you can change the from field to a specific user in your unit, and you can edit the subject line and the body of the text message as you see fit. You can also add files to the communication if necessary, and you can delay the communication by some length of time. We don't use SMS messaging as part of the Fullerton usage of CHRS recruiting. And this particular status does not have an internal communications. Internal communications are designated as additional users from the job. I'll show you a different status that has that. You can ignore this section here. This is only shown in the training environment. This will not happen when you use the system out in the real world. Whenever you send a communication, you can also add a note here at the bottom. That's only visible to people who are using the system. That doesn't go through an email to the candidates or even to internal users. Typically, it'll ask you about updating a job status at the very bottom of the communications window. These should be left to their default values so that the job status is updated when necessary. So to send these communications, you would simply click on the Move Now button. That changes the applicant status and sends the internal or external communications. Now I'll disposition a candidate to a status that has internal communications. So if we move, for example, the candidate to candidate successful semifinalist recommendation, you'll notice that the email applicant feature is turned to off, set to no, and that's because the applicants aren't alerted at this phase. But the additional users from job feature is set to yes, and this allows us to email internal users, people who work at CSUF. There are 6 possible roles that you can email by using these checkboxes. Refer back to the table in the training script to see what each of these mean. We've selected the ones that should be emailed by default given the particular status. We don't typically use this section here on additional users by default from offer. If one of the 6 checkboxes up above are not satisfactory for who you need to email, then you can use the other additional users box. To do that, you would click on the magnifying glass, type in the first few letters of the person's name, first and last, that you're trying to reach, and click search. And that will usually bring up the person that you're interested in. If you can't find the person using that technique, then simply find their email address from Outlook and paste it into the email box here. You'll click select to add that person to the communications list so you can see the new name here in that box. Again, we've entered the values for the email from, email subject, and email body by default. Again, you are welcome to edit these as you see fit. You can also attach files and delay the message for internal communications, just like you can for external communications. One last feature to note is if you move an applicant to a status that indicates they are unsuccessful, you'll be asked to answer a question about why they were unsuccessful. So you'll see this question appearing here. Please indicate the reason for selecting a candidate as unsuccessful. There'll be a drop-down list or several choices, and you'll select the one that's most appropriate for that candidate. So those are the major features of the communications window. We also put together another resource, which is the Training Script 6 appendix, which shows all the internal and external communications associated with each status. So you can see here in the second column the statuses. The third column shows who is responsible for moving the candidate to that status. The third column shows the people who are emailed internally for that particular status. The next column shows the subject of the email, and then the last blue column shows the body of that email. The orange columns show the external communications, again showing the email subject line and the body of the email. All of the orange columns are referring to the applicant, so these are sent externally. This appendix is really useful to see all of the communications in one place, and you can see what each of the statuses does as far as communications are concerned. That concludes this training unit, and you can learn more about the CHRS recruiting system in our other training units. Thank you very much.